So in this video, we're going to discuss the electoral systems within the AP6 and the 5 countries that use them. So first, to define and to give the acronym for a few key terms related to the electoral systems of different countries. The first one is FPTP. It stands for first past the post, meaning that in a given election between two candidates or more than two candidates, whoever gets the most votes in a given election wins. So this is most likely found in countries that also use single member district, which we'll talk about later. The second one, proportional representation, PR. So seats in the legislature are allocated based on the percentage of the votes cast for a political party. And then talking about some allocational systems, how districts are drawn or how members kind of represent geographic space. SMD stands for single member district, meaning one person per district, and MMD stands for multi-member districts, which means the possibility of more than one person representing a given district. So just to go through the basics, these are the electoral systems that the 5 countries within the AP6 use. We're going to focus specifically on Nigeria and Mexico, so we'll sort of be back to these countries right at the end. But this might be a good place to stop the video and write these down. And we'll go a little bit more in depth into each of these, okay? So first, thinking about what a first past the post system looks like, also sometimes called the plurality system. So in a first past the post system, the winner takes all. So it is first past the post comes from the sort of horse race metaphor, meaning that kind of in a given race, whoever gets there first with the most votes wins. So the winner must get more votes than anyone else. But often that doesn't necessarily mean that they require a majority to win. So there are some countries, and specifically when we go back to our kind of cheat sheet, Nigeria and Russia and Iran, that actually require the candidate in an election to get more than 50%, kind of in an executive race. But also some countries do not, include kind of the Mexico, United States. So generally speaking, the first past the post system encourages kind of this splintering into 2 large, broad-based parties. So the United States is sort of the ultimate representation of this, but you can also see this in some of the countries that we study, such as Nigeria and in the United Kingdom. So first past the post, generally speaking, you tend to see the coalition building that takes place within politics happen before parties are created, or sort of in the stage in which parties are created. And you end up with fewer parties because they're essentially racing to get the most amount of votes, right? Which is in contrast to a proportional representation system. So for first past the post is used kind of within the AP6. It's used in many, kind of all 5 of the countries that we look at in some form or fashion. But thinking about it, kind of conceptualizing what it looks like, in the United States, we use first past the post for just about everything. For the executive, kind of with some wrinkles related to the Electoral College, and the results tabulated at the state level, and kind of all of our legislative races are first past the post. In the United States and Canada, they use a first past the post system for their parliamentary elections. In Mexico and Russia, the executive races or executive elections are first past the post, and then the legislative elections are partially first past the post. And Iran and Nigeria both use first past the post, primarily with a few wrinkles added in. All right, so what this actually looks like, kind of combined with a single member district, are things kind of, this is Mexico's legislative elections. So you can kind of see what that looks like in terms of election results. In the United States, the kind of most recent election that we have, kind of winning of different states and kind of the race to get to 270 in the Electoral College is a system that is essentially first past the post, as well as so these are, let's see, kind of showing the same thing, I think. And then in the UK, their parliamentary elections, or the House of Commons elections, are sort of by single member district using first past the post, meaning whoever gets the most votes in each district represents that district, and then you kind of have competition across parties in that way. So, why do first past the post systems encourage large, broad-based parties? Essentially, because no matter how many people run a district, the person with the most votes wins. So it has the sort of uh, effect of limiting political fringe parties or kind of third parties, as we think of it in the United States, because people tend to try to fold their beliefs into parties that seem more politically acceptable. So this encourages parties to become larger, spreading their umbrellas to embrace more voters and kind of covering more ground. And parties without big groups of voters have little hope of winning. So, like we said before, they oftentimes kind of fold themselves into the larger parties. So, like I said, I always explain it as first past the post systems. The coalition building sort of takes place before the parties are created, or as the parties are being created. Whereas in a proportional representation, you have lots and lots and lots of parties, and then they build coalitions after the elections. Um, I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Okay, the other side of the coin, proportional representation. So I think it's kind of interesting in this class. We are very, very underrepresented as it relates to proportional representation. So it is actually the dominant system in electoral system. Not dominant, but it's the majority electoral system used in the world. We only have about half of two of our countries that use proportional representation. They only sort of use it in half of the legislative elections, Russia and Mexico. So proportional representation gives parties seats based on the percentage of vote they receive. So like I said, 89 of the 195 or 196 countries in the world use only proportional representation. So that's the system that they have. And an additional 34 use a combination of proportional representation, first past the post, like Mexico and Russia. So in this system, a vote is cast for a party and not a candidate. And the parties themselves create lists of basically who will represent a district before the election. So from that list, given the amount of people that win seats or the amount of seats that are delegated to each party, essentially kind of members are chosen that way. So what this essentially does is this creates very strong parties and leads to high levels of party unity. So candidates who tend to support the party tend to be highest on the list. And we're going to see, even though it's not a proportional representation system, we're going to see some of this idea in the UK, which has some interesting wrinkles kind of layered on top of first past the post. What we also see in proportional representation systems is that they increase the chance for women and minorities to have seats because they oftentimes are included on party lists, or parties will do that beforehand to make sure that there's sort of representation beforehand. And it also guards against sort of biases that the electorate might have in electing ethnic minorities or electing women. And what we see in proportional representation systems is you have the vote, and then afterwards, the parties, based on the results of the vote, end up having to build a coalition government or build a government that can require more than 50% or has sort of a governing majority. So that is where we see the coalition building sort of taking place after an election. And what this also can do is create they also have the potential for having multi-member districts in proportional representation systems in which more than one legislative seat can be filled. Basically, more than one seat is in each district, which potentially can happen within a PR system. Let's see. The other things we've talked about, and yeah, ultimately the biggest part of this is what we see within proportional representation systems is that they require or they encourage a multiple party system. So kind of the thinking in this is in a proportional representation system, even if you don't have a chance of winning the overall 50%, every percentage you get, generally speaking, gets sort of rewarded with a generally commiserate amount of seats in the legislature. So the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or any sort of third party, that sort of results in immediate representation. And there are countries, I always explain this as sort of to keep the riffraff out, that essentially require a threshold of at least 1% or at least 2% or at least 5% that a party must get in order to receive one seat in the legislature. Usual threshold is 5%, but you also see some with 2 or 3%. And this is Sweden is not one of our countries, but this is essentially the benefit of a proportional representation system is you have lots of parties, more kind of options that are viable, and essentially people and you can kind of think about what would happen given these results. You would see coalition building happening between the Social Democrats and the left party and the liberals, maybe not liberals, maybe the Green Party. Sort of the left wing of Swedish politics would come together, the right wing of Swedish politics would come together, the moderates would maybe be the swing party, depending on sort of how that would go, and then you would sort of build a governing majority that way. So proportional representation, this is what it actually looks like. And in this class, we don't actually see a ton of proportional representation. So heading back to our two countries we're talking about now, Nigeria uses a first past the post system for their executive elections to elect their presidents. And there is a runoff possible if the first round, the person who wins the presidency doesn't get 50% and at least 25% in each state. And they also use first past the post for all their Senate and all of their House of Representative races. And Mexico uses first past the post as their president for their presidential elections. No possibility for a runoff. Simple plurality. So we've seen in Mexico where presidents have won with 40% or less than 40%, and it uses essentially a half and half system for the Chamber of Deputies, where half of the seats are allocated based on first past the post, and then you also have some seats that are allocated based on proportional representation. And the same thing for the Senate. I think the split there is 2/3. So 2/3 of the Senate for first past the post based on states, Mexican states, and then a third of the seats are set aside for proportional representation. All right, thanks. Bye.